Welcome to Talking Heads on USA Global TV, starring the one and only wonderful Dr. JACALYN. It's a prestigious place where world-class influencers and experts meet, and where you'll find the most trusted advisors and coaches for all things in life and business. Visit usaglobaltv.com to sign up for our newsletter, get the value you need, and be first in line to learn about events and giveaways and other valuable content. Connect with us. Email Dr. JACALYN at usaglobaltv.com to talk about how you can become part of USA Global TV. That's USA Global TV, where the doctor is always in.
Hello, everyone, and welcome, or hopefully it's welcome back to USA Global TV and Radio, where we have 29 live broadcasts on TV, radio, and podcast platforms all over the world. Thank you again for your support and your loyalty. We really do appreciate it. I'm Dr. JACALYN KERBECK. I'm the president, founder, and chief listening officer here at our network. Our show today is The Listening Mentor. I am the listening mentor, and I help people listen at an elevated level. Sharing this space with me is someone who also is all about leading with her heart, helping lift up other people, and helping people bust their stress. It's the Harley Street stress expert joining us from London, Caroline Heward. Hello.
Hello.
Nice to see you. Welcome back.
And you too. I feel like I'm never away, really. I'm always
Well, it's just being part of the family, right?
It is. It feels like a real family. I feel very here always. Thank you.
Wow. And thank you for saying that. I feel like we have, I think, 39 or 40 team members. I've lost track, but most of the team really reaches out and embraces one another and collaborates and finds ways to watch each other's shows and learn from one another. So that's what we're here for: education, a little bit of entertainment, hope, and inspiration. So, Caroline, for people who are joining us for the first time, tell us what you do to help people bust their stress.
Well, I offer a free consultation either on Zoom or Skype. You can reach me and book it in at NoMoreStress at live.co.uk. So what do I mean about stress? Some people say they're not stressed, they're okay, but they don't sleep well, or they're suffering with physical ache and pain, or they're feeling lonely, or they're feeling sad, or they're feeling anxious or depressed. And all these things are your symptoms, the symptoms that represent stress. And so if you have any stress, whether it's physical, emotional, mental, or behavioral, like in relationships, then reach out and I will help you literally bust your stress by identifying your root cause, which will release the emotions of the first time that it ever happened to you. And that will give you an incredible night's sleep. And I invite you to take advantage of that free consultation. It will help you and change your life forever.
Thank you, Caroline. And today, when we think about busting stress, one of the key indicators, or I should say the precipitators for anxiety, is fear. We are afraid of so many things. We lose our curiosity and we just become overwhelmed with, what if this happens? What if that happens? And we stay in our box, so we stay nice and safe and warm. But in the meantime, we develop these characteristics that are really not pushing us forward. They're taking our curiosity and putting it into a box. Instead, that fear starts building and building, and it affects our relationships. It affects our conversations. It affects our communication. So what is your experience in working with clients when it comes to their fear and their anxiety? What have they shared with you?
Well, lots of things. We can all be afraid of many things. Some, sort of the most overt fears are things like spiders, snakes, heights, being in crowded places, and things like being in relationships, or being alone, or not being alone, or not, somebody dying. There's all sorts of things that people are afraid of. And there's no one way to describe a fear for everyone, because that fear is very real. Even, sort of fear of the weather, thunder, lightning, they're going to be struck down. And so it's important to acknowledge that that fear is very real for that person. It's so real that you can't laugh if somebody is afraid of thunder or the rain or going out, even if it's okay for you, because that's something that's happened to them in their childhood, or something that's been ingrained in terms of behavior from people around them when they were very young. And so they've developed this fear and panic. And one of the things that I do is I identify where the fear has come from and break down the initial root cause, so where it first occurred. And, that has to be very gentle, because fear can come out in nightmares. It can come out in night traumas. So it can come out in any aspect of your life. We can be afraid of, as we've had recently, the pandemic, afraid of, getting a virus. We can be afraid of, dropping down dead, very quickly. I remember my mum used to say to me, you never know what's going to happen, so always wear clean knickers, when you go out. And I'll never forget that, no matter what you're doing, and that was because there was a fear from her perspective of, we could be knocked down by a bus or a train or a car. So you just don't know what's going to happen when you step outside your front door.
Thanks for sharing that, Caroline. My parents told me that too as well. And I thought to myself, is the first thing they're going to check is my knickers? Let me see where are the knickers. Let's see those knickers.
It's a very old-fashioned, approach, isn't it? If you land up with an accident and you land up in hospital, then, you need to make sure your underwear is clean. And
Doctor, come on in. You're going to see this. Well, I have something sorry, there was a little delay there. I have a fear to share with you, which is kind of a new fear. And the rational part of me knows that it's ridiculous. But I've shared before, we live on the bay here. And the bay, as I look out the window, has, beautiful wetlands. And you can see the water. You can see the wetlands. Well, for, I guess, 2 days before, for about 5 days, we had the tail end of Hurricane Ian. And that bay no longer was a bay. It looked like the ocean. All the wetlands were gone, and there were white caps, and the water was just flowing and flowing. And at one point, it actually turned toward the house, and we have an empty lot next to us that you're not allowed to build on. And the water came pouring off of the bay onto the lot. And even though there are wetlands there and there are all kinds of rocks and boulders to prevent the water from coming, it just kept coming into the street, and the house on the sidewalk was completely underwater. And anyway, my point is this: I look out now and I see that everything's back to normal, but I still see that. And I think about those people in Florida, what it must have been like to be in your home and up to here and, submerged in water on your roof, and maybe actually have to dive in to what used to be your neighborhood or your street. And so I have a paddle board, and I thought before we leave here to go south, I want to take the paddle board out again, and maybe I would do it tomorrow, but I can't. And I can't because I see the ocean. And even though the ocean's not there, it could turn into the ocean. And I know realistically, when I look at the weather report, that's not going to happen, but I can still see it just as clear as day.
It's very real fear, because it's happened in Florida. This is not making stuff up. This is very real, because you've got evidence. And that's what fear is. If you break down the word fear, it's false evidence appearing real. So you have evidence that it can happen, but the fact that it's evidence, you're then starting to create it as if it's actually happened. And it hasn't. But the evidence that's from another place has made your mind, it's made it up that it's possible. And so if it's possible, then you will have that fear. And, it's a very real fear. And I certainly would have that same experience if I was in your situation, because it's been horrific what's being shown that's happened in Florida. People have just literally lost their homes, their livelihoods, their businesses, everything.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think I'll probably take the board out anyway, just because to get over that fear. But I read a story that I thought was so incredible about this man who had training, survival training. I forget what his job was. And his mother, I think, was about a mile and a half away, and she was incapacitated. She was in a wheelchair. I think she was an amputee. And he knew, because she said she wouldn't leave the house, that he was going to have to somehow make his way to her. She was adamant, I'm not leaving the house. So the mother was on the phone with him and some other people where they were. And so her son decided, I'm going to leave and go save my mother. And there were no more streets. It was all flooded and water and down power lines. And somehow there was this one piece of wood that was floating around, and he held on to it, and he made his way to his mother. And when he got to her, she was up to here in the water, and she could have easily within the next few minutes drowned. And my point is that even though it was something that not many people would probably do, he did not let his fear impact him. His survival training kicked in, and he wasn't thinking about himself anymore. He was thinking about how his mother must be feeling, and he made it. And I think if we were to think about other people instead of ourselves, like instead of putting it back on, oh, I'm so afraid of this, I'm so afraid of that, how can I change my behavior and maybe empower someone else?
That's so true. That's a brilliant example of when we're looking after somebody else, if we have like a parent, elderly parent, or a child, that we don't think about ourselves. We immediately think about that, the vulnerable, what we consider is the vulnerable person that we're taking care of. And then that gives you adrenaline that will supersede the fear. It will supersede that anxiousness and the fear of what might happen, which takes you into incredible strengths and resistance of what you're able to do, because then you will be in a bigger survival mechanism for the other.
Yes, absolutely. So the title of our show today is about how fear impacts our communication. So I think we pretty much established that fear is real, that we really do believe we are afraid of certain things. And so when this happens, how does it impact the way in which we're communicating with others? And I want to give an example. If you're in a relationship where there's domestic abuse, if you're in a situation where you're literally afraid for your life, or afraid of your partner, or afraid to speak up, how does this impact your ability or inability to communicate?
Well, when you're in fear, what happens is that you're working on your adrenaline is firing up. And so instead of the blood pumping around the heart, which is where it should do, what happens is that it then repels away from the heart, and it feeds your limbs. And it also feeds your inability to regulate the emotions. And so this is where abuse can happen when the person is in fear. They will then have, be very handy with their fists, because the blood rushes to the limbs. And when you are in fear, you'll either be in a fight or you'll flight, you'll run for your life. And so this is very important. That's the mechanism of how we will respond. We'll either stay there and fight if we can, or we will run. And if we run, we'll sometimes, if we can't run physically, we will shut down the feelings and emotions and not speak up, not communicate, literally by being silent so that we don't get hurt.
Excellent. And silence is also a way in which people communicate. I've had that happen to me, where I got the silent treatment for a week from somebody I was in a relationship. I mean, literally, I've mentioned this before, I could stand up and go like this, like nothing. The person would not acknowledge me at all. It takes a lot of strength, I think, to block someone out like that. But I feel like when we don't express ourselves, especially in traumatic situations like that, our feelings become more and more repressed, and our confidence level also starts to deteriorate, where we literally become a victim And instead of being a survivor, we become victim mode. What do you think about that?
You're totally right in saying that, because when we repress the emotions and feelings at that moment of that trauma, we then create a trauma that we relive almost for some people on a daily basis. And sometimes that trauma can come up in dreams, nightmares, so night tremors, traumas. And this can lead to, depending on the severity of it, post-traumatic stress disorder. So this is what people do when they're in the army, for instance, and they're in a war. They can't be in their emotions and feelings when they're being shot at. They have to be in, sort of that fight mode, the survival of, and the adrenaline kicks in and the cortisol kicks in. And so they're in that fight and they will stay there to fight. But when they're not in that situation, that's when the feelings can come up. And that's where it will lead to problems for the person, because they didn't deal with them then. They won't want to deal with them when they're in their normal domesticity. And so this is what can create their nightmares, their trauma, unexpressed trauma, then starts to affect the body, whether it's physically in physical aches and pains, or whether it's emotionally, through repressed feelings and emotions, where they literally shut them down. And then the escape route then is the mind. So then they'll be very analytical, very thinking, conversational, analytical, without being actually in their feelings and emotions. So relationships will suffer, because when they're in their thinking, conversation, rather than their feeling and emotion centers, then they will find it very difficult to express themselves emotionally in general situations.
Brilliant, Carolyn. I really like that. We've been talking about verbal communication, and I'd like us to talk a little bit about body language, and also when someone is not able to communicate and they're using sign language or using some other way of communicating. We're so used to, I feel, I don't want to say taking for granted, but not everybody can communicate the same way. Not everyone can communicate right now. For example, we can be seen. Somebody could be watching us on a television platform. If they're listening on a radio platform or a podcast platform, they're getting a different experience than if they can actually see us. So can you talk a little bit about those nonverbal cues, nonverbal body language that we use to actually express or not express our fears?
Oh, this is a biggie. 80% of our communication is non-verbal. So what I mean by that is our facial gestures, it's our expressions. So if you're only listening but can't see the person, then they might be saying, "Oh yes, I'm really happy to get involved in this project," and they're shaking their head. But if you saw them, you would know that was a definite no. But because you're only hearing them, you're then assuming by default that the words that they're saying are truthful. But the body has not learnt to lie. It can't lie. So even if you are expressing verbally, "Yes, I'm really happy to get involved in this project," but when you look at me, you will see for sure that I'm not interested, that it's a definite no. And with the way that we cross our body and different aspects of conversation and topics, when we kind of cross our legs, our knees, if we're crossing our ankles, they all mean different things because they're all related to the chakra system. So if we're crossing our knees, for instance, and away from the person, and we can't see them, effectively, that's meaning that they're not feeling in their power with you, and they're protecting themselves from being affected by the situation that they're in. If you can't see them, what they're saying is only 20% of what's real. So we will be missing a lot of their communication because we can't see. And when we're covering up our different body aspects, so like if you cover up your ears, this is the three wise monkeys: see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. And as we get older and as adults, we temper those overt gestures by kind of doing this, see no evil, or we're doing, oh God, of, playing with the earring, or just playing with your ear, or having an ear infection will be that you've had something that's difficult. Or we might sort of be, sort of touching our mouth like this, sort of half covering it, or even, looking down from the person and away, because when I'm looking down like this, you won't feel connected, and you can't see that if you're only listening. So there's a lot of misunderstanding and miscommunication when we only see the written word, so by text, and when we only hear what's being said verbally.
Absolutely. I agree with you. I love how you just shared another way for people to consider other people's body language and even our own. I remember many times in my corporate career, especially with men, talking to them and they'd be like this or like this. What are they doing? Why are they doing that? I always thought it was because they had something to hide, but maybe not.
Well, yeah, because, sort of round here, it's covering the mouth, essentially. So they're saying something that they don't want to say, or they're trying to stop themselves saying something they don't want to say. And we have all sorts of ways of covering the mouth. It might be, like this, or it could be very overtly like this, but some people are a little bit more, let's say, classified in the way that they're covering the mouth. So they might be doing this. I see a lot of this, where they're literally just, they've got their finger over their mouth like this. So it just depends, but we can't stop it. And it just depends how the person has learned to hide what they're really not saying or expressing. And we can't stop that. It doesn't matter, even if people know, even if, somebody's watching this broadcast and they see all these, these telltale signs, and they say, oh, right, I do that. Or somebody turns around to their partner and says, you do that a lot. I see you do that. The person won't be
What are you hiding?
You're hiding. What is it you don't want to tell me? But, once you know, then you become aware. So that's the first step to changing your behavior. You become aware. But even if you know and you're not being truthful or not expressing your truth, you still won't be able to hide those gestures if you are not being able to express your truth. So this is about living the most authentic life possible by standing and speaking and expressing your true self rather than who you think you should be or who you think the other person wants you to be.
Yeah, of course, the great comments. Something else I just want to mention for anybody out there who's had this happen is when you express yourself and someone jumps in to tell you you shouldn't be feeling that way. That's ridiculous. And you were just merely sharing how you feel, but someone felt they should launch into what you're saying and have an opinion. And I often wonder, is that because the other person is uncomfortable with themselves for some reason and they can't control themselves and they have to cut in on you? What does that mean?
Yes, when somebody does that, and I admit that in our changed times, and I am a little bit out there, I do things that are very out there, even, sort of in 1988, I joined Holland and Barrett as a manager. And so I learnt things that, were very on the edge. And so I've always looked outside of the normal sphere of what we consider as our normal box that most people are viewing their world from. And so there will be times that I will come out with things. And when somebody said, oh, I'm not comfortable about that, immediately I offer them a space of compassion and a place of, it's not about making them believe what I believe or think. And if they're not ready to hear, then I just stop sharing. I just literally feel that that's not comfortable for them. And I don't want them to feel uncomfortable. And that's our natural, that we will literally shut up and not share what we feel is real for us, for fear of offending the other person or being judged, or the other person being critical of what we think and trying to persuade us to believe what they believe. And I don't feel that's important to get into those kinds of conversations. If they have different views and opinions, I'm really respectful about where everybody sits in what they believe, think, and feel about life. And at the same point, I want other people to be respectful about what I believe, feel, and think about situations and circumstances. And if I offer that level of compassion and respect to others, I would like to think that others will offer that to me. It doesn't always happen, but I'd like to think that it's about behavior breeding or leading the other person's behavior. So be how you want to be treated by others. And if you don't feel safe, in inverted commas, to express how you genuinely feel, then don't.
Excellent. Thank you. And I wanted to add a little bit more onto that. In the scenario that I presented, where I'm sharing something and then someone launches in with whatever it is they have to say, I never used to say anything, but now I actually will say something. I'll say, I'm sorry, but I wasn't actually asking for your opinion. I'd like to just have you hear me out. Then it's dead silence. No one's saying anything. And then I feel like a jerk for, to me, acknowledging what is so obvious, that the other person was out of line. And now I'm the one who's out of line. So then that kind of makes me feel like, okay, I'll go back to how it used to be and I won't say anything and I'll just be cut off.
It's a very tricky place to operate. And if you're not resonating with a person in terms of their views, their opinions, and there is a lot of that about at the moment. There's a lot of people that are being clammed up and told that they have to believe certain things, and if they don't, then they are a jerk. That's a good expression. I feel that there has been a lot of people silenced for having different opinions and views about situations and circumstances. And there is more of that, because of bigger shared views because of social media. And it's uncomfortable to see when somebody's expressed what they truly feel and think, and then they're being judged, ostracized. There is a new expression that they've, I'm just trying to think, silenced is one word, but they've been literally dropped out of the face of the earth. They've been cut out of society and ostracized. I don't believe that that is appropriate, and I can see that is happening in our current times. That doesn't feel then comfortable to express how we truly think and feel in some situations. And that concerns me, that we're breaking away from what we thought was okay to be true in our true authentic selves, and not okay. Now we're sort of following a line almost that we have to follow the party line, and that can lead to challenges for many people that have different views and opinions. That's not right, that's not wrong. That simply is an expression of what is happening today.
Thanks, Caroline. And do you ever work with couples or families?
Yes, and as an individual, because I've tried, I said that very operatively, to work with couples. And it doesn't work because they've both got different things going on. And I find that unless they've done a lot of counselling on their own, can they really then look at what's going on jointly? And I like to work with each person in their depth. And the childhood of one person is probably not relatable to the childhood and challenges of the other person. And what's happening is it's coming up in their relationship to handle, and it's coming up into a combustion state. And so, yes, I do. And I've gone through families in terms of working with them individually, but they're bringing up stuff. So obviously I have to have an extreme strict code of conduct of confidentiality. I don't share what one person has said to me because it's not appropriate. And that's the safety net of the couple or the family members coming to me, because then they get a release of the fear of losing the trust of sharing what's really coming up for them.
Yes, I can understand that. That does make a lot of sense. You have to do the work on yourself first. Otherwise, I think it gets to just blaming. It's all her fault. It's all his fault. Everybody's pointing fingers. So I'm just wondering, when we find ourselves actually acting out of sorts, or our communication style or behavior has changed as a result of what we're going through, what are some things we can do ourselves when we realize, wow, I can't believe I just said that? Or why did I just take that? Why did I just allow that to be said to me? What are some things that we can do so that we show people this is how we want to be treated, and yet at the same point, we're respectful to the other person?
That's a very, very good question. And I want to share some very practical, simple, and extraordinarily useful things that you can do. When we react, we then go into a reaction mechanism that then comes out as, that can come into an argument, that can come, the emotion gets in there. And so my first thing to invite you to do is to stop, to reflect, to breathe down into your belly. And that takes out the emotion from the action to react. Because as soon as we're reacting, we're not in a space of being logical or intelligent or having a practical conversation. And then it's a he said, she said thing. Well, you did this and he did that. And, you did this and that's why I responded that way. And that's when we get into the blame game. So stop, go silent, reflect. And this doesn't have to be for a long time. But if you almost take your own counsel and breathe through that, and then you can respond in a more appropriate way without being in that reactionary space. Sometimes I've had emails which, when I've read them, sound as if they're being very antagonistic to me. And it's probably because I've read them in a way that, I think they're being. And then I thought, oh, I'm not going to respond to that. I'm going to breathe. I'm going to take some space. And then I'm going to read it again rather than responding straight away. So the reaction mechanism. And then when I've responded in a space where I've been reading it and being calmer, that's when I've realized, perhaps it's not quite as negative as I first read it. So that taking that space to reflect, to really feel into what's been communicated, whether it's verbally or written, and then respond from a place of not being emotional, from a place of being practical.
That is really the key. It is that ability to take a step back, pause, obviously do some deep breathing, and take the emotion out of it. But so many times we're so charged up with the emotion. And I know you've seen that circle that has all the emotions on it and how they're all interconnected. And we go from just being kind of ticked off to fury, so quickly. And then when we look at the situation later, I know this has happened to me, and I'll be like, I can't believe I misinterpreted that. And it could be that we misinterpret because we're tired, because we don't feel well, because something happened, because we're, not in our best place right now. And we misinterpret something that then starts this whole chain of reaction.
I've in the past, when somebody's showing care and consideration and they're concerned, and they've called me every night, and that kind of becomes overbearing because, I live on my own. I'm not in a relationship at the moment. And I'm kind of feeling, well, I don't really want to have to respond to you and explain my reactions, and what's happening. And if I'm not in a place of needing to explain, why am I feeling on some level I'm needing to explain why this is this and this is that? And even though the person is being concerned out of true authenticity and love, it can get you very ticked off, as you put it, because it's like, just get out of here, let me just get on with this and I will sort it out. But it can come out very, why are you calling me every night? I don't need this. I don't need somebody to call me every night and like check up on me. I live on my own. What's the matter with you? And this, it's not because they're doing it badly or horribly. They're doing it out of love. And when we're in that state of feeling that we need to explain, then the response and reaction is there. And I'm not saying I'm not human. I will respond and react and saying, hey, get out of here. Just leave me alone, will you? Give me some space. And then I will sort it out. And then I will let you know when I've sorted it. But, we are allowed, I feel we're human. We've had a lot of changes in our world, recently, in our recent years. It's okay to not feel okay. We can't all be on top of everything all of the time, and it's a bit of a mantra. I feel that we can't be 100% all of the time. It's not real. It's not human. And so if we have a low day, to feel it's okay, that we don't have to justify to anyone why it's not okay. Because when we go into that space of that being not okay, we then pull through with more vigor, more encouragement and more drive to solve what we see as a problem. So this is the place sometimes people have to go. They have to go into that depth to kind of come out of it. And, sort of, I call it rising through the ashes. The phoenix rises through the ashes.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. We're able to go a few minutes longer today, so we're going to take a commercial break and then we'll come back. So do stay with us. We'll be right back after hearing from some of our sponsors. Thank you.
Hello, boys and girls, and welcome to Story Garden. Your host, Diane Boehm. I'm so happy to have you here today.
Diane Floyd Boehm tells wonderful stories that warm the heart, spark the imagination, and unite people and families across generations. For children, Diane's Harry the Camel connects with all of us who've ever wondered how different our lives might have been if only we'd been born something better, like a wonderful horse instead of an ordinary camel. In the end, we all learn along with Harry that there's nothing better than just being yourself. Diane's Little Girl in the Moon looks down on earthbound children and wonders if they know she's just like them. A story of love, home, and the bond between mother and daughter, its powerful theme that we're each of us different yet all of us the same plants a seed in children that promises to blossom within a loving and trusting grown-up. Diane's new biography, Rise, recounts the experiences of her grandmother, Ruby, to reveal the hidden strength of the human spirit. Ruby's story inspires all of us to become the best versions of ourselves. You'll find all of Diane's delightful books and much more at DianeFloydBoehm.com. Visit DianeFloydBoehm.com. That's DianeFloydBoehm.com.
The session that we had with BCAT was really entertaining and enlightening. We were able to put together some very specific steps that we as individuals can take, and it was really fun to all come together and see sort of where we're going as a team and how we can all get there together.
We had a tremendous experience with the BCAT partners. One of the challenges that we have as an organization is to make sure that we have the right people in the right chairs doing the right thing. To do that well, you have to have synergy. You can try to dream up ways to make sure that your group does that, or you can rely on experts. We would recommend BCAT partners to anybody who's looking to take their organization to the next level.
I'm Caroline Heward, the Harley Street Stress Expert. Welcome back to USA Global TV and Radio, and welcome back to the Listening Mentor. Today, we are looking at fear and how it affects our communication with others in our work situations, our personal, in our families, and our relationships. I want to look at how anxiety can affect our communication. So when we're anxious about something, it might be because we are in fear of being judged by the other person. So that anxiety lives in the mind. It's actually not real. When we're anxious about somebody might say something, if I say this, or if I enact in this way, I might get ticked off. And if that anxiety is running around in the mind, and it's actually not real. It's not real from the perspective of the other person having actually said those things or doing those things. We are creating an entire dialogue in our mind and then responding in a space of fear. They might do this, they might do that, so I better not say this, I better not act in that way. And all of that is a complete scenario that's in your mind. And then what happens is we are all vibration, we're all energy. E, energy, equals MC squared. So we're all energy. And what can happen is that we will then respond in this fear mechanism, this fear-based response, which will in turn, because we're all energetic, create that response back from the other person, even though they might not have intended to be responding to you in that way. So we can create situations and experiences that are beyond our control on some level because we're thinking about it. We're thinking and creating that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. Thanks for bringing us back in. I was going to share, how many times do we play out scenarios where we have the answers on both sides? Have you ever done that?
Many times. You just wouldn't believe. You've got this whole like sort of he said, she said, and it's going on in your head, you know, sort of, well, if I say that, then she will do that. And there's a whole soap, I call it a soap opera. There's a whole movie going on up here, and we are the leading cast of that movie. And then we go through this whole, well, if I do that, she'll say this, and there's a whole conversation that's played up, and it's all here. And then we go into the situation. We've already got the conclusion because we've analyzed it all up here. And then we create it into our reality. So if we know that happens and we create not so great situations, we can actually create some nice situations. What about, creating a new relationship in a lovely way, just by that smile, that interaction, that connection, that heart-based connection, without saying. Sometimes we don't have to say stuff. We just can feel stuff. And that person will connect from the heart space, because we are heart. We all have a heart. We all have a connection vibration, and we can connect through a heart level of vibration. And then when you're connecting here from the heart, all there is love and compassion and gratitude.
So true. So true. When we have those conversations with ourselves on both sides, usually the show gets canceled. The soap opera is like, it does whatever it is you're thinking about. That's not what happens anyway. But yet, why don't we put more time into creating something positive or creating a situation filled with hope and inspiration, as opposed to always going the other way, the worst case scenario? This is probably what's going to happen. Nothing's going to work out. I knew this was going to. Why do we have to go the other way?
That's because the mind has a function, just like the liver has a function, the spleen has a function, the heart has a function, the mind has a function. And what it will do is it will literally logicalize, philosophize, religiousize. It will just literally go up and down and back to front, and it will just keep doing that. And there's never a conclusion, because the mind doesn't reach those kinds of conclusions. So when somebody's kind of going up and down, inside and out, this is the way that the mind operates, and it's good. So the people that are in professions like the banking industry, the trading industry, people that are project managers, this is really good skill to have, that turning it around in their mind. But then when they go into their personal lives and they're still doing that normal mind thing, they never get anywhere. They don't make the decisions, because they will literally talk themselves into a situation and then talk themselves out of it, all in their head, and they didn't act on any of it, which is funny. And I call it winding ourselves up like a little spinny top and never actually getting anywhere or doing anything.
That is such a great analogy, because we can all envision the top just spinning, using all of that energy. And, it's also exhausting, these scenarios that we play out to ourselves. And by the time the situation actually presents itself, we're so darn tired that sometimes we're not even aware of the fact, wow, it's actually a great situation. I can't even imagine this. So I feel like if each and every one of us was able to take all of this negative energy, this combustive energy, if you will, and channeled into hope and inspiration and curiosity. Curiosity is so important. You've talked about this, Caroline, so many times here, about a child, a baby, how they're filled with wonder and curiosity, and they start crawling, and then they stand up and they fall, and we're there cheering them on. But at some point, those cheers turn to lectures. Don't do this and don't do that, and I told you not. And when do you think that actually happens, where we go from cheering on to putting down? It's
Yesterday,
fear. The fear comes in.
Yeah, yesterday I actually witnessed a little child. She was with her mother. The mother was pushing the pram, and she was looking at she was picking up leaves. There's a lot of trees around where I live, and she was picking up some leaves, and she was just in total admiration and just looking at it, and kind of in wonder and awe. So beautiful, and I literally laughed, and this is the wonder of a child. And the child laughed and the mother laughed, and I left them, in that like sort of beautiful experience. And that's because the child was probably no more than 2 years old, maybe 18 months, 2 years old. She was kind of just out of the pram. And that wonder stops when we get told, no, you can't do that. No, that's not right. This is the way that it's done. And so we almost get it stamped out of us, unless you're a bit like me and you just kind of, go off and go and explore anyway. I'm a bit of an explorer and adventurer in terms of what's possible. Rather than being in countries, I tend to do it in experiences. And that's what a child does. You don't have to be in an exotic country to have an experience. You can have an experience in your own living room just by being in a chanting situation, when I'm singing along to a mantra, and I feel different and I feel amazing. And it's what's inside of us. And we do get it stamped out when we're told no. When we're told, no, you can't do that. And then we find ourselves conforming. conforming to what we should be and should say, rather than who we're feeling we want to be and want to express ourselves. So it's conformity.
It's so true. And it goes back to the comment that you and I talked about earlier about the knickers. And, think about that's the main purpose is when you leave the house to have on clean underwear, because if you're in an accident, someone discovers your underwear is not clean. How ridiculous. How about this one? Oh, I hope your face doesn't freeze like that.
Oh my gosh.
Or you better watch out. If you eat too much candy, your teeth are going to rot out of your head. All these scenarios, they're all negative. Instead of saying something positive, and then I think we get it so ingrained into us, we start passing it on to other people. And as you know, as a therapist, when we use don't, can't, shouldn't, then we're inclined to actually want to try it. We're inclined to thinking about it, because why shouldn't I do that? Maybe I should. Let me think about it. And I just feel like as a society, each one of us has to take responsibility and accountability for lifting each other up instead of constantly pointing out what could be the obvious. We realize if we do this, we could potentially die, or we could potentially get hurt. But what about if we do it and we don't? What about if we do it and we have an incredible experience? Why can't we focus on that?
I remember my mum, I trained for my career and then I decided to leave the career I was in and train for something else. And my mum was very concerned. She says, well, you spent all this money on this career and now you decide to do something different. I says, well, yeah, it's time for a change. She said, well, you're giving all that up. And I says, well, no, some of it's transferable. And she was very worried that I'd be starting all over again, starting to in a new career and a new space of education. And she had a lot of fear about my change. And I was the explorer. I had my explorer's hat on, and I says, well, I'd like to go and look at this, because this looks interesting. And I remember Mum being in a lot of fear about, a job is not something you like, it's something you do to earn your money. And it was very old fashioned. And in terms of her growing up, this is not to make my mum wrong, but I'd had a different experience. I've had a number of careers that I've loved. There've been hobbies that have turned into careers, and I've really enjoyed them, and it's something that I'm good at, and it's because I naturally enjoy them that they've not felt like work, and that's been a pleasure for me. And for some people, they've not had that experience, and it does depend. We will foretell people's experiences from our own experiences. And yes, we will say, don't do that, because that will be the most criminal thing you could do. You'll be throwing everything away. And that would be from their experience. It's important to almost stand up and speak up for what you feel is right for you, because we're not all made the same way. We're all different. We are all human. If we were all the same, I have this phrase of, life is like a bag of all sorts. There's all sorts of all sorts in all sorts, that we are a combination, but we attract and detract because we are a bag of all sorts. We're different. That's what makes us human. And I feel that that's the nature of what makes our different challenges work for some, work for others. There's no one size fits all.
Absolutely. And Caroline, I've really enjoyed this show. I've got more comments, but we have to go because our next show is about to start. How can people get in contact with you, and who should reach out?
Well, if you're stressed, if you're literally feeling, in a stressful relationship, whether there's a stressful situation at work, in your family, if you're not sleeping, if you're feeling a lot of aches and pains, if you're feeling anxious or depressed, or if you're feeling just literally out of sorts, reach out to me. Allow me to help you bust your stress. Reach out by email on NoMoreStress@live.co.uk. Tell me where you are and tell me what the problems are, and let's schedule a time either on Zoom, Skype, or a call if that works for you. And let me help you bust through that stress. I promise you an incredible and deeply restorative sleep. after the call.
Beautiful. Thank you again, Caroline. I really enjoyed this show. As always, our next show is coming up. It's presenting Pet Psychic Amina. We'll be back in less than 5 minutes, so do stay with us. Caroline, have a beautiful weekend, and I look forward to seeing you next week.
It's been lovely. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.